This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, I can get rid of that box. There we go. Uh, well, anyway, I'll back up here. Just welcome. This is the session one or workshop one. I thought Ann was going to call these things, which I actually kind of like better. And let's see here. Okay, so we'll start with an opening prayer. And since you guys are muted, I'll just say this out loud, and you can follow along silently here. Okay, in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. O God, who wills not the death of a sinner, but rather that he be converted and live, grant, we beseech you, through the intercession of the Blessed Mary, ever Virgin, Saint Joseph, her spouse, Saint Junipero Serra, and all the saints, an increase of laborers for your church, fellow laborers with Christ, to spend and consume them souls for souls, through the same Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you in the unity of the Holy Spirit, God, forever and ever. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay. First slide here I want to talk about is just the overall overview of what we're going to try and do in the officer training, club officer training. Session one is going to focus on the big picture of Serra and U.S. Vocations, some on club operations and event planning. And the club operations is highly focused on the president of the club. Then next week we start session two, and that will cover the vocations committee and the programs committee. And then session three will cover the membership committee and the communications committee. And if you're wondering why I'm doing this tonight, it's because Ann had some conflicts when we tried to come up with a schedule. We wanted it to be consistent, and we just decided we'd stay with consistent times, and I could take some of the times that she didn't have. So that's what we're up against, up to here. Okay. In terms of the big picture of Serra, you know, this is one of the favorite pictures they show in Serra. And actually, one of the priests got cut off. I think there are actually 7 priests standing here. And I wish I could remember what parish these guys are from. All these guys, all these men were ordained from one parish, and they had one priest every year for 7 years. And that's what this depicts. It's pretty incredible. I mean, it's somebody had to go there and test what's in the water, because it's very unusual, I think. Okay. It starts with our mission statement here, which is to foster and affirm vocations to the ordained priesthood and vowed religious life, and through this ministry grow in our Catholic faith. And there's really 3 parts to the mission statement if you think about it. The first one is to foster new vocations to priesthood and religious life. The second one is to affirm and support existing vocations to priesthood and religious life. And then the third is to grow in our Catholic faith. Those are kind of the linchpins and the touchstones that we always need to keep close at hand in Serra to make sure that we're staying on mission. We'll talk a little bit about the saint for whom we're named, Saint Junipero Serra, and he's famous for this statement, always forward, never back. That came from a letter that he wrote to his parents when he was in Mexico, and he was getting ready to head up to California to establish the missions. But I think he was trying to tell his parents that he wasn't coming home. I think he knew that. So this is just a thumbnail sketch of his life. He was born in the 1700s in Majorca, Spain. He joined the Franciscans at a very young age, 16, although I think that was common back then. And then at age 35, he volunteers to go to the New World as a missionary and work first in the missions in Mexico. And then at age 56, he began establishing the missions in California. And he died still in the 1700s, near the end of the century, at the age of 70. It's said that he traveled 24,000 miles on foot as a missionary, and those weren't frequent flyer miles. Those were the hard kind that you have to walk every step of the way. We'll talk about some of the things he had to put up with, but his missionary work was really remarkable in light of the challenges that he had. He was canonized in September 2015 in the United States, and we celebrate his feast day on July 1st. Like I said, that's kind of a thumbnail sketch. It kind of puts him in a time perspective for you. But there are some things that I'd like you to know about Father Serra that I think are really important. The first is that he purposely chose a very humble life of service. You know, a lot of people can miss the fact that for the first half of his life, Father Serra wasn't a missionary. He was in Spain and he was a renowned professor of philosophy and theology at Lulean College. Um, I'm guessing it was a pretty cushy job. You might even say he had it made. But then at 35, he hears this call from the Lord to go and service the missions in the New World. And so he heads off and he trades what has to be almost a sure thing, a nice, easy life of renown for a life of uncertainty and adventure and danger. So, pretty incredible that he made that choice. And I think that's one of his strongest attributes is his humility in what he did. Second thing to know about Father Serra is that almost the whole time that he was a missionary, he was in constant pain. Um, when he landed on the east coast of Mexico, uh, he uh, he set off on foot for the 250-mile journey to Mexico City, where the Franciscan headquarters was. He was bitten by either a snake or a serpent, and his leg became terribly infected and just covered with ulcers on the lower portion. He never really recovered from this injury, and twice in his life it brought him so close to death that he was one of the rare people that had the old extreme unction sacrament applied to him more than once. So pretty incredible, and he never let it become a barrier for the work that he had to do, nor the hardship that he had to endure. Third, he believed in the power of persistent prayer. This is a great story about Junipero Serra that I wish more Serrans knew. But when he set off at age 56 to establish the missions in California, the first part of the journey turned out to be something of a disaster. They were supposed to meet with a supply ship from the Spanish Navy in their first mission site, which is now present day San Diego. And what happened is that they failed to rendezvous. By the time they got to the mission site, they were out of ammunition, they were out of supplies, they were out of medicine. Most of the soldiers were sick. And the commander of the military unit that was escorting him actually made a decision to cancel the whole thing and go back to Mexico City. But Father Serra convinced the captain to hold off for 9 days until the Feast of St. Joseph. And he said, let's give it 9 days and see if we spot the sail of the ship. So the commander reluctantly agreed. Father Serra had all the monks and all the friars start an immediate, constant 9-day novena, St. Joseph. And wouldn't you know, on the 9th day, the Feast of St. Joseph, at 3 p.m. in the afternoon, they spotted the ship, and it allowed them to continue this amazing part of his life to establish missions up and down California there, all because he really believed in the power of persistent prayer. And finally, he was a real advocate for the poor and marginalized in society. I'm guessing that Father Serra was not well liked by the Spanish authorities, by the Spanish military, or by the Spanish colonists. He was constantly intervening on behalf of the local people who were being taken advantage of by them. And, I always think we're so lucky to have a patron like him, because I know we've got one of the best advocates in heaven, and we have one of the most important missions too. So just I like you to know that. I think that's more important to know about Father Serra than when he died, when he lived, where he went, all that kind of stuff. Pretty incredible guy. Okay, we'll turn to a little history of the Serra organization. Most people are aware of some of these things, but in 1935, Serra was started by four lay Catholics in Seattle, Washington. Then in 1951, probably the most significant event of all occurred when we became an official apostolate of the Catholic Church. And in fact, Serra is the only lay apostolate that's officially aggregated to the church for vocations work or for any kind of work. You might ask, what's the significance of that? Well, it put us directly under the authority of the Vatican. And it means that we live by the Vatican's structure of authority, which means basically that we report to the bishop and the vocations director. And then we also have an Episcopal advisor. His name is Father Cardinal Tom Collins from Toronto right now. And he attends almost all of our activities and events. And he's really active in giving us advice and oversight and leadership. So the apostolate being aggregated was really an important thing for the Serra organization. It's important to realize, though, that we do not have an exclusivity on vocations work. Our role is to be the leaders in the vocations efforts. And I've occasionally run into situations where we find a competitor. I had on one of my early calls when I started these training, we had a woman who was just enraged that a local parish vocation ministry committee had taken all kinds of things down from the serraus.org website and implemented them in the parish. Well, I didn't know what to tell her. I said, I'd count your blessings. See if you could get the other parishes to do that too, because that's what we want to do. We want to lead in the effort. And we lead with our own efforts. We lead by encouraging and supporting vocations efforts of others like parish vocations committees and the Knights of Columbus, who are great supporters of vocations. They're not our competitors, they're our teammates, and we have to realize that. And we lead all Catholics by trying to create a culture of vocations in a diocese. That's a little bit of the history of the organization. Here is kind of an org chart as such of Serra International. And you can see that Serra International is composed of councils. That's the majority of it. There are some areas where we have clubs or members that don't have councils. They're handled by area trustees, but that's only less than 4% of total membership. And then Serra International kind of oversees the Serra Foundation. We're going to talk about the foundation for just a short time. But the foundation is legally a separate entity, but the reality is that it's sort of managed through Serra International. So the Serra councils, there are 10 Serra councils in the world right now, and you can see them listed there. The United States is by far the largest council. That's no big surprise, I don't think, since Serra started in this country. There are some surprising things if you look at that list, though. Aside from Spain and Great Britain and Italy, there are no Serra clubs in Europe. And you got to think back then, Europe was still incredibly Catholic. Another one is Africa is not on that list. And to me, that's amazing because I know in our own diocese, we have 12 Nigerian priests. And if we didn't have them, we'd be in really deep water here. So they're generating vocations like crazy and exporting them. Greg tells me that it looks like we're going to charter some clubs and maybe even create a council in Africa here, which I think would be a good thing. We have an Episcopal advisor, I already mentioned him, Cardinal Collins. Our president of Serra International is Greg Schweitz from Omaha. His upcoming replacement is Kurt Medico, who's from Texas. We have a staff of John Liston, our executive director, and he has under him 3 full-time employees and 1 part-time employee. Right now, we're short 1 employee who left. But aside from John and his staff of 3.5 people, those 4.5 people basically are the only people in Serra that are paid. All the rest are volunteers. And you can see there that worldwide, we have 12,500 members. And my last count was 398 clubs in 46 countries. But I think that we've actually chartered so many clubs in the US in the past 6 months, that number may be low. But that gives you a little bit of an overview of Serra International, how it's organized. I'll mention one other thing because it's a parallel to the US Council. Serra International is governed by a board of trustees. And there's a trustee from each of the councils. And then there are just trustees that usually represent former officers in the organization that make up the board there. This is I don't want to spend a lot of time on this slide because there's some misleading things on it. But basically, I want to just see a little overview of the finances of Serra International. Now, this is worldwide Serra, remember again here. And there's only 3 takeaways I'd like you to get from this. The first is that basically we operate at a break even. That's sort of the goal. We don't try to make a profit. We don't try to have a loss. We just try to hit as close as we can to break even. The second thing is we have no interest-bearing debt, and we haven't for many years. And the third thing is that we have a reasonable cash reserve that gives us long-term sustainability. The reason that I don't like this chart, I'm trying to get another group of numbers put together, is because it looks like the revenues are $796,000, almost $800,000. The reality is that because Serra International collects the dues for the U.S. Council now, and then pays those dues, all of the revenues of the U.S. Council are located in the revenue line, and they're also located in the expense line. So it's like sort of like a double accounting to me. I'm trying to get them to come up with a form that strips that out, so we can just take a look at Serra US, which we can, and what Serra International is doing apart from the US there. So, but anyway, just like to give you some feel that it's managed in a fiscally sound way. If you want to know what the value that Serra gives to local clubs, it's important to start with the observation that our mission is not limited to the United States. Our mission is to the worldwide Catholic Church, and so we need to be focused on the Catholic Church everywhere in the world. And so what Serra International attempts to do is to spread our model to the areas in the world where there are no strong vocation efforts and adapt them as necessary to the local culture. One other thing that Serra International does is every year it brings together Serrans at an international convention. And the international convention this year is being held in Chiang Mai, Thailand. Excuse me. Last year it was held in Toronto, and then I think we canceled the one before that because of the COVID restrictions. And after Chiang Mai, next year it will be held in New Orleans, and then it's looking like it's going to be held in Kansas City after that. But these conventions are really great. They're a combination of incredibly inspirational speakers, great information, and also the most wonderful liturgies you've ever attended as a Catholic. I mean, I think at Chiang Mai we're going to have 4 cardinals and maybe a dozen bishops. It's really impressive when you see that many hierarchy, that much of the hierarchy of the Catholic Church, and then on top of it, all the priests will be up there saying mass too. So they can hardly get everybody on the altar. That's really impressive, though. And then finally, Serra International, with this through the apostolate and through our Episcopal advisor, coordinates its activities with the worldwide priorities of the Vatican there. We'll talk about some of those priorities here. Okay, so now I'm going to jump over and talk for a second about the Serra Foundation. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but the foundation is sort of our grant giving and fundraising arm of Serra. And its mission closely parallels the mission of Serra International itself. So their first prong is to fund programs that foster new vocations. The second prong is to fund formation programs for men and women who are in formation or are priests. And the third one is to enhance recognition of Serra International. This is some information I got from Tim O'Neill. It's about a year old, but he hasn't been able to provide me anything new as of now. But basically, since 2005, the Serra Foundation has given over $3 million in grants to advance the Serra mission around the world. And right now, or as of 2021, the foundation has about $2.3 million in assets under management. And I want to make a comment there that all the assets in the foundation are invested in accordance with the guidelines of the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops. So very careful to follow the teachings of the church in terms of how that money is being invested. And the year 2021, we had $165,000 in donations that were received by the foundation. So gives you a little feel for the size and breadth of it. This slide I created because I always got a lot of questions on where does the money go from the foundation grants? And this is kind of a tracking back here for 4 years. And the amount of the grant is over at the right in bold. But you can see, for example, in 2019, of the $86,500 that was given, 66,000 went to 13 U.S. organizations, and 20,500 went to 9 organizations in 9 other countries. And you see basically a ratio sort of like that all the way through this. Sometimes the number of countries differs, but I'll pass along some reasons for that. The biggest grant that has been given, and I've seen this ever since I've been an officer in Serra, is that every year we give $25,000 to the North American College in Rome, which is the seminary that is operated by the U.S. Bishops. I think the Canadian bishops are in on that too, but they always get, I think, the largest chunk. And then they go to almost always there's a grant for about $10,000 to the IPF, which stands for the Institute of Priestly Formation. That's located in Omaha, and they bring priests in from all around the world. Now they're bringing seminarians too to help rejuvenate them and get them back on track and get their excitement levels up. So some important things there. John Liston is always quick to point out too that while it doesn't look like we give a lot of money outside the United States, he said, you can't believe what a $2,000 grant in Africa will buy. He says, we've given money to basically build seminaries with $2,000. I mean, it seems kind of incredible to us, but US dollars have such strong purchasing power that they can do a lot of good. And I think we get a huge number of grant applications every year that we cannot satisfy. But there, you'll see every year the Serra magazine comes out, usually the 4th one, the one in November, and it has a focus on the foundation and it usually talks about some of these projects that are funded there. And I want to say one last thing about the foundation. Everybody always thinks about it as a place to give money. Serra clubs need to think about it also as a place to get money. And if you have seminaries or convents or houses of formation, and I've even seen it given to creative diocesan vocations offices that have some creative program that they wanted to do. Have them apply for a grant. It's all done online now. It just has to be done by September, end of September of the prior year to receive a grant in this year. But I think I've even seen, I think one Serra club got one once for $1,000 for something they were doing that was considered pretty creative. So anyway, you know, I hope what you come away from this part of the training is a feel that the foundation does a lot of good work. And when we ask clubs and we ask individuals to give, it's a really easy way. It didn't matter how much you give. Just $25 makes a big difference here. And it's an easy way to meet our obligation to the worldwide Catholic Church. Okay, are there any questions about the foundation here? Maybe I should stop and ask. Okay, let's keep going. Just interrupt if you have any. We're going to drop down a level now. We talked about Serra International worldwide. We mentioned there's 10 councils. We're going to drop down to our council and talk about that. So we're in what's called the U.S. Council. And currently I'm serving a 2-year term as president, and Dr. Ann Rote, who put these slides together, is going to be the next president. She's agreed to take 2 years. That's a new thing in Serra, but we're trying to deal with the fact that it's kind of a wasted learning curve. If you're here for a year and then you leave it, somebody else comes in and has to start all over. So I think it's a good move on our part. We're big enough that we have our own Episcopal advisor, Bishop Tom Daly, who's from Spokane, Washington. And you can see here on this map, there are 9 regions in the U.S. The map has one inaccuracy. I'll get this corrected, but it shows Louisiana as being part of Region SC, which is South Central, really Texas. And about 2 years ago, we made a decision to move Louisiana over to Region SE, which is the Southeast. So they're now part of the region that has, looks like Tennessee, North and South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, and Florida there. So, but that's the only inaccuracy. And you just get an idea of how these regions are split out here. So there's 9 regions. Each region has a regional director, and each region director is on the board of Serra US. So we have a board that governs us, just like Serra International has a board where they have representatives from the council. We have a representative from each region. In addition, we have officers, president, president-elect, and past presidents, and all the other officers for the four key vocation areas. So, but probably the most important thing to realize here for you folks is within the regions, it's broken down by districts. And districts are would roughly be a group of clubs that are in some reasonable proximity, although that's a debatable question. I was the district governor for Iowa. We had 6 clubs in the state, and they couldn't have been spread any further apart if you tried. So sometimes it's a real challenge. But the district governor is sort of the liaison between Serra US and Serra International on the one hand, and the local clubs on the other. And really, it's in a critical position in Serra. I think it's the most important position in all of Serra, because without it, clubs start to think that they're in it alone. You know, they're just in a foxhole. And there's nobody else fighting this battle with them. And it's the district governors that I think bring this awareness through all the information they have about what all the other clubs are doing. And a lot of what goes on in districts are called district councils. And that's where, for example, a group of presidents of clubs might have a phone call or a call like this and share ideas of what's working, what isn't, and try to get ideas. So great source of exchange, and the district governors make that possible. So I've already talked over here at the left or the right, you can see my screen's kind of covered up, but I think I know these numbers. There are actually about almost 7,600 Serrans now, and just almost 200 clubs. So we're obviously the bulk of Serra in the world. We're the biggest council, but again, that's not surprising because Serra started here. So let's take a look at, just like we did for Serra International, I'd like to give you just a brief financial overview of Serra US. And again, I think the same 3 takeaway points are what I'd like you to grasp from this slide. That basically we operate pretty much at a break even. We try very hard to do that. This year we actually had just a slight positive. We had $3,400 we ended 2022 with. And we also are pretty strong cash-wise, so we have sustainability. And again, we're like Serra International, we have no interest-bearing debt. Okay, let me go through some arguments for the value of the U.S. Council provides to Serra clubs. I get this question a lot when I go around. What do we get for our dues? Starts off that the Serra Council, the U.S. Council, is really the repository of all the wisdom of Serra through the years. So all of our training programs, the officer and club manuals, all those things were done in the U.S. Council, usually translated or then shared with the rest of the world. But this is where everything's been tried and sort of proven here, in large part, not completely, but in large part. It's also a clearinghouse for new ideas and problem solving. And probably the most important element of that is the training that takes place here and the sharing that happens when this is over. But also the rally, the Serra rally is one of the most critical functions, I think, in the U.S. Council. And it's really designed to inform, inspire, and ignite the leadership of Serra, whether it be a club officer, a district governor, a regional director, or an officer in the U.S. Council. So it's very valuable from that point of view. It also publishes the Serran magazine, which comes out 4 times a year, and in a hard copy format, and is mailed to every Serran household. Another important function is that just like Serra International coordinates with the vocation priorities of the Vatican, this is much more true in the United States. The U.S. Council coordinates the priorities of the U.S. bishops with Serra clubs. So, you know, these are some of the things that the bishops have recently asked us to tackle here. One is the annual vocation awareness program. So those would be things like Priesthood Sunday, which is in the fall, and National Vocations Awareness Week, which is in November, World Day for Consecrated Life, which is in February, and the one that's coming up this weekend is World Day of Prayer for Vocation. There's 4 of them. they're probably going to be adding something there because there's a Sisters Week now, and there's also a Brothers Day. So I think you're going to see some more program materials developed for those. But the goal here is to create materials that clubs can go and pull down from the website, and either ideas or materials, and then tailor those to a parish or to their diocese. Second big one is the Newman Connection. We actually started this program. It was called College Connection for Catholics, if you're a longtime Serran. And we tried to develop a database for all of the 5,000 higher education facilities in the United States, and then try to get names of students from all the Catholic high schools and then Catholic public schools, RE programs, to share with those so that those kids can stay connected to the Catholic Church when they go to college. There's some pretty interesting studies. It's sort of unbelievable to me, but one I saw said that the things that kids do in the first 3 weeks of college sort of define what they're going to do and where they're going to put their interest for the rest of their 4 years. And unfortunately, if there's no way to contact them about our Catholic faith, they're not going to think about the Catholic youth ministry that's on campus there. So the goal here is to get them connected with the local youth ministry on campus. And I might mention here too that this Newman Connection works closely with the Newman Centers, but those are two different names, two different people. I think the Newman Centers are based on the recent saint. Can't think of his first name. Henry Newman, I think it is. The Newman Connection is actually a private firm that we couldn't keep funding the College Connection for Catholics. We were spending $25,000 a year on it, and we were still having a hard time filling this database of 5,000 colleges. And so a private foundation thought this was really valuable, and they came forward and have offered to basically administer the program. And where we put $25,000 in a year, they're putting $250,000 in. So, and we have representatives that sit on their board, so we know what's going on there, but a good organization. The bishops are really keen on that because there's a study, we'll show it later on here, that says that it's age 17 is about the time that most vocations are discerned on average. That's just about the time kids go to college. So we want to make sure they don't lose their connection with the Catholic Church there. Another big one that's more recent here, the bishops have asked us to see what we can do to get parish vocation ministry going. And so we've offered a free training session for that. We'll talk some about that tonight a little bit, but really when we talk about the vocations effort. And probably the big one here that we spent the most money on is the serraspark.org website, which are these tools that the bishops ask us to put together in a digital format that can be downloaded and tailored to a parish or to a diocese for vocations work. And what they really are, they're almost all proven vocations programs. They aren't all used by Serra clubs. There are some that were just specific to vocations directors. One of the tools is just talks that have been written. So there's a talk for seventh graders, eighth graders, ninth graders, 12th graders, and a vocations director can just go and pick that up and use it with whatever modifications he wants to make. But very valuable, and the vocations directors really love it. And of course, I think you know that as we have improved the materials there, a lot of our Serra clubs are using the programs on the serraspark.org website too. And then there's the typical professional support that you get for the all volunteers. I depend on it quite a bit for all the technology and the training that goes on. So that's kind of a brief answer to the question of what's the value of the U.S. Council to Serra clubs. I put this slide in here, it's always been in here, but we just like to say it, that what are the dues? So dues are assessed semi-annually on January 1st and July 1st. There's an initiation fee that's standard no matter what category of member you are, and it's just $11.75, and it covers the whole first semi-annual billing period in which it's received, and you get a new member kit and a pin that comes with that. For full members, the total is $46, of which $23.50 goes to Serra International and $22.50 goes to the U.S. Club or the U.S. Council. And if you're a spouse or under 35, it's exactly half that amount. Just gives you some feel for what the dues are. So what do you get from those dues? Well, you got to think of it, I think, as an investment in the future of our church. So you get the Newman/College Connection. We've already talked about that. The serraspark.org website. It's interesting that the serraspark.org website is now being used by vocations directors all through Africa. I don't know how they translate into their language, but apparently English is kind of a second language there. And so we're actually doing a lot of good outside the U.S. already. The Ignite Parish Vocation Ministry Training, that's something we put on free if a diocese can pull together 5 parishes with about 5 people from each parish who are interested in implementing it. We have the 7 Serrans prayer teams for vocations directors. That's actually a lot of work every year. Judy Cousins has been the lead on that. And the reason is that vocations directors in general turn over every 3 years. So every year there's about a third of the whole vocations director group is brand new at what they're doing. And then we build partnerships with the bishops, with the vocations directors. We're starting very hard to work with Focus, NCYC, which is the youth group, and young Catholic professionals, and a group called CALL, which is Hispanic business leaders. And then finally, we put on Serra Meet. So people ever ask that question, and there's actually a really good article. It's going to come out to all the clubs again called What Do I Get for My Dues? It's a 2-page article that goes into this stuff in more detail there. Okay, and then every year we put in the priorities of whoever is the president, and I am the president this year, so I'll share my thoughts here, but I had 5 priorities. First is to strengthen the cultural vocations among Hispanic Catholics. Not so much with a goal of getting them to join Serra, although that would be wonderful. The real goal is to get Hispanic Catholics praying for Hispanic vocations. That's the way we get a culture of vocations into the Hispanic community. Second is to broaden use of the Serra vocation tools in parishes and schools nationwide. And I really see the Ignite program, the Parish Vocations Ministry training that we do, as the most effective way to do that, because when a diocese comes to us, if they can locate 5 parishes and 5 people from every parish who are interested in the training, they're doing all the hard work. They're qualifying, who our audience is going to be there. Whereas if we just go tackle it parish by parish, first you have to find out is anybody even interested in doing this, and it becomes a real plug to do it that way. So Ignite is a great way to accomplish that. This is one that I've been pushing. I'm trying to encourage clubs every year in their annual program planning to inform and involve the bishop. Again, you go back to the fact that the bishop is really the person we report to. Vocations efforts are so critical, you can't afford to not have teamwork where the vocations director and the bishop are going one way and the Serra club's going the other way. So, and the only way you can solve that problem is just take a little time and share what you did and what you plan to do. And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. Fourth one is I really want to encourage clubs to recruit younger members. Our missionaries contest doesn't really distinguish between the age of the members that join. And I think that's sort of a mistake, because I think that the real future of Serra are the people that are right now 45 to 55 and sort of the empty nesters is what I would call it. The people that are starting to redefine what the values are in their life. And, a person that joins at 50 is worth 10 times what I am joining at 70, because I won't be around that long, but they will, and they'll keep paying the dues. They'll step up into leadership positions. I've been trying to get somebody to put a motion forward on the board to cut the dues in half for everybody under 55. Currently, we cut it in half for people under 35, but so far I haven't had any luck there. But I still think that would be a good investment. And finally, we want to start or restart 5 Serra clubs between now and June of 2024. As it turns out, we're going to have 5 started almost before June of 2023. So we've had some real luck there. Those are the priorities that I've been working on. Okay, and then there's some challenges. I think we're aware of these, but it doesn't hurt to say them. We're still suffering from COVID and the effects of COVID and the pandemic, where clubs are meeting less often and membership is less willing to come to in-person meetings. There's a visibility and awareness problem in most parishes. That if there's one thing that I'm sad about for being a Serran, it's that so few Catholics know we even exist. Fewer yet have any idea what we actually do, and that's a real problem for us. We have a name confusion problem. We're often confused with the Serra Club, completely different organization and completely different values. Some clubs have begun tackling that by using the word or the abbreviation for saint in front of their Serra Club, which I think has eliminated a lot of the confusion, but not completely. And finally, we are very limited in terms of the ethnic representations of non-whites in our whole organization, every club, every board. So long term, we have to get those people engaged too, because they're part of the church and we need to hear from them. Okay, that's the big picture of Serra. Any questions? Are you guys still awake out there? Okay, I don't see anybody unmuting, so I'm going to plow ahead. So let's talk about vocations, the status of U.S. vocations. There's a lot of good things happening, but the fact of the matter is that the priest shortage is still a real crisis. Even though we've seen priestly ordinations steady to up and graduate level seminarians the same, the fact of the matter is it's not enough to replace the number of priests that are retiring or dying. And so the number of diocesan priests in the U.S. is declining steadily. It's down 30% since 1965, and I have a table that'll show you that. If you add to that the fact that the Catholic population in the U.S. is up 58% since 1965, you get an idea of the challenges we face. And we have a real specific challenge with serving the Hispanic community, because they now total about 35% of all U.S. Catholics, but we just don't have enough Hispanic priests to go around. And that may be a reason why they don't attend church as much, because they don't understand the language. Where if we had Hispanic priests, bicultural, born in the United States, we'd do much better. So that's kind of an overview. Here's a graph that a lot of people like to show. People get kind of depressed when they look at this, and I think that's wrong to look at it this way. You can see we had a big fall off in the number of in seminary enrollment trends in the late 60s and early 70s there. But you have to think about what was going on in the world. I heard one of our speakers, I can't think of his name, up at Mary University in Bismarck, North Dakota. He gave a great talk, and he said the world has really changed during his life as a Catholic. He said in the 50s and the 60s, our whole country pretty much accepted a Judeo-Christian value system. And then that all started to change in the 70s. And he said, we actually went from having a tailwind to having a headwind, a fierce headwind, which is the way he describes the secular culture we're up against right now. And you can see that there. So I think that the impressive thing about this graph is that as much as the world seems to be wanting to go over a cliff, we're still finding people at the pretty steady rate who want to be priests. This is the table I mentioned. The new priests are down the left-hand column here, and that not every year is represented there, because this CARE research is kind of odd how they present their data. I take what they have, but you can see that the total number of diocesan priests with 1995, 32,000. Now it's dropped to 24,000. So pretty big loss there. And again, that's due to death and retirements of priests. One final thing I want to share with you, because it's so basic to what we do in Serra, but this is from a book called A Priest in the Family by Father Brett Brannon. He was one of our Serra Meet speakers. But he makes a very important point that the Holy Spirit calls the vocation, not us Serrans. Our role is to create a culture of vocations so that the call can be heard. The key influencers of people that decide to become priests are other priests, spiritual directors, and mothers, in that order. But the priests overwhelm in terms of the key influencers. I think it's 60%. The next one is 40%. The time of most serious age consideration is age 17, and that's why the Catholic bishops are so hot on the Newman connection and us supporting that. Most of these young people identify having spent time in Eucharistic adoration. And of course, for that to happen, there has to be Eucharistic adoration. So that's one thing that Sarans can do. 60% of priests were altar servers. So it's kind of a target rich environment for us. And it's why a lot of Serra clubs have altar award and recognition programs. 50% of seminarians discern out, and too many people view that as a failure rate. I've been to clubs where I talk, and the vocations director is asked to get up, give a report. He says, "Well, so and so decided to leave the seminary," and there's this collective sigh. He goes, "Oh," but that's the way it's supposed to work. I mean, that's the whole idea of discernment, is to figure out what God is really calling you to do. And so we need to get more people in the seminary, but the fact that they're discerning out is not a failure at all. And in fact, I've heard more people agree with me on this, but in our own diocese, I would say that 4 key leadership roles in the diocese, including the vice chancellor, are filled by guys that were in seminary at one time. I remember praying for every one of them, and they decided to opt out. Some of them got married, and but they are great Catholic leaders, very strong. 92% of priests are happy being a priest. I wouldn't say priesthood is exactly a career, but I can tell you that there's no other career that comes anywhere close to that satisfaction level. And finally, the inability to marry is not the cause of the priesthood shortage. The reason that we know that is because mainline Protestant churches have the same shortages of ministers right now, and they allow marriage. I think too many Catholics think that this is kind of a silver bullet, it's going to solve all of our problems. My guess is that it won't really solve anything. But again, it's up to the Pope to decide what he wants to do there. Those are just some key facts about vocations. Any questions or comments regarding that? Well, you guys are an easy audience. Okay, let's go here. How clubs operate and the event planning calendar. This is some pretty basic stuff, but and it's just good to say it, I think, every once in a while. All of our clubs are chartered by Serra International, and they're governed by bylaws, and they have a club number that's unique to them. Clubs are organized not by parishes, which is really unusual in the Catholic Church, but by dioceses, areas within a diocese. And as a result, the clubs report to and work with and for the bishop and the vocations director. That's really important to remember. We do everything through a combination of prayer, fellowship, and service. Some people will disagree with me on this, but I think vocations recruitment is not the primary function of Serra. By which I mean, there are people that think we just go around every day asking every young person we find, do you think about being a priest or think about being a sister? Very few of us actually do that, because I think we're all aware it's a question that has to be carefully asked, and there has to be a real sincerity, because young people smell insincerity like you just can't believe. So our goal, again, is not so much to ask as it is to create a culture of vocations through prayer. And the typical year is from July 1st to June 30th, although we have some clubs that are on a calendar year. Clubs are structured with a board. I've talked a little bit about it's almost identical to what Serra International and Serra US boards are, made up of current and former officers. There's usually a president-elect, and an immediate past president. And then there are vice presidents of 4 standing committees, typically: vocations, programs, membership, and communications. We have added a new standing committee to the U.S. Council this year, the vice president for cultural outreach. And I think a lot of clubs are considering adding that position in their club as well. Then there's a secretary, a treasurer. A club foundation representative was an old concept. It kind of fell through the cracks. Now it's being revived. But I think the goal there is to get more local, regular awareness in clubs about the good that the foundation does. And then finally, there are trustees, and they can be former officers or they can be special appointees over time. In terms of club meetings and activities, the board meetings are typically once a quarter. But the member meetings are usually held at least once a month, and most clubs still it's twice a month. And usually, if you're doing 2 times a month, there's one program that's more formal and structured. Usually it has a presenter who makes a formal presentation. The other one is a meeting, usually after first Friday or first Saturday Mass. And it's just more of an informal gathering with coffee and donuts, but That's actually the one that I like a lot. That's this kind of a freewheeling conversation and discussion that takes place there. And then in the months, there are some months when you, instead of having a program, you have these annual events. And not all clubs do all of these, but most clubs do some of these. So one, they do something special for the ordination mass. They have a priest, bishops, and sisters appreciation dinner or lunch. And then they have something for the seminarians. When they have those, usually there is no program scheduled for that month. That sort of takes the place of the program meeting. And this is an interesting slide about how clubs finance activities. I didn't know anybody did anything different than my own club until I got to a little bit higher level in Serra. But the one that I think is most prevalent is what I call the low dues, and each Serran pays their meal costs. That's about 2/3 of our clubs are in that category. There's another group that was kind of stunning to me, and they're what I call high dues, but the club pays all the meal costs. So basically, in your dues, you pay for all your meals for the year. And I saw one, is it the Duluth? I think it was the Duluth Serra Club. They had $440 was their annual dues. My own personal feeling, I think twice about writing a check for that amount of money, but especially since it's mostly for food costs. But they had a survey of whether they should increase those dues or lower the dues. Everybody thought they should increase them to get better quality food. So you just never can tell. Then there's a couple of clubs, outliers, really interesting approaches. One club, North Platte, Nebraska, covers all their expenses by fundraising. And if you can believe it, it's one fundraiser where they sell cinnamon buns. So they must sell them to all of Western Nebraska to come up with the money for that. And then we have another club, the Lehigh Valley Club in Pennsylvania. Jane Herrera is the treasurer of that. She was telling us about this, but they had complaints that some people just couldn't afford the dues. And so what they did is they stopped issuing invoices for dues, and they gave a suggested amount, but they asked people to pay what they could. And she said 2 people were able to stay in the club because of it, but they've always come out more than if people had just paid an invoice, which is kind of interesting. Okay, we're getting a little bit more into how how officer groups need to operate. And the most important one here is they need to be a team. And a lot of this stuff is obvious, but one thing I learned is that if a club has 4 officers, membership, programs, vocations, and communications, and they're all operating in a silo, you can bet a disaster is about to happen. Because if you don't have good programs, or you don't have your program laid out far enough in advance, the communications job is hopeless because there's nothing to communicate. If you have bad programs, the membership job is going to be hopeless because people won't be attracted to come to the meetings. You could go this list. Every one of these officers is dependent on the other, so they really have to act as a team, and that's one of the most important functions of the president, is to make sure that officers are acting as a team and not as independent silos in terms of trying to do their functions. So I'm going to skip through, kind of go to a president's checklist here, the way I put it, and I'll start with programs. And the thing I emphasize here, the most important is you really need to get your whole program scheduled for the whole year. And even my own club, we've gone through this thing where we're almost rolling month to month, and somebody says, who's going to be the speaker next month? And somebody says, well, who should be the speaker next month? Because we don't have one. And I'll tell you, the problem with waiting that long, people, if you have good speakers, their calendar's full. Your chance of getting them to fit into a Serra schedule is almost impossible. And I always tell people this, that I'm convinced that if you sit down in June or July, plan out your whole year with your team, not just the program's vice president, but the whole officer team, get ideas for who you're going to approach to be speakers, and approach those people right then for the whole year. That is less work than fighting your way through the year trying to figure out how I'm going to find the guy whoever's going to speak at the next luncheon. I'm just convinced that it just doesn't work if you don't plan it ahead. And the other thing here is there are special events an appreciation events and national awareness events. And when you do the program master plan, the master schedule, you need to make sure you have people identified who are going to lead the efforts on those. Okay, the president's checklist on vocations. The most important one is right at the top. This, I think, ought to be a goal of every president, is that they ought to make sure that every single Serran in the club is involved in at least one vocation activity. And by vocation activity, I don't mean setting up chairs for the Sisters Appreciation Lunch. That's great stuff. Somebody's got to do it. I'm talking about a prayer activity, or maybe a school program, something like that. But something directly tied to our mission. I think that would be really important. And then I always break activities down into two categories. There are those that are just within the club. When I joined Serra, that was about all there was. It seemed like we were just this little knot of people and we did everything ourselves. And at some point, Serra leadership looked out and said, there aren't enough Serrans, we got to get more people praying. And so we went outreach to the parishes and we started introducing our vocations programs to the parishes. And you can see them there, some of the things we can do. In terms of membership, president has got to understand that there has to be awareness if you're going to have effective membership programs. And awareness doesn't come from the membership vice president. It comes from the vocations vice president. It comes from the vocations activities in each parish. And that recruiting, inviting new members is everyone's responsibility. It is not just the membership vice president. You can use special invitation events. If you can get the bishop involved, that's great. I think it's really critical to have new member induction ceremonies. I think that's fallen by the wayside in too many clubs. And in terms of member retention, it really comes down to three things: informing new members, which means good communications, and also a new member orientation. There's like a 36-minute one out there that really does a pretty good job of telling you everything you need to know about Serra. They need to feel welcomed, and I don't think we try hard enough at that, Serra. And that's as basic as having name badges at a meeting, even the kind of throw away, tear off ones. Having everybody at a Serra meeting introduce themselves, no matter how long they've been in Serra. Just, here's my name, been in Serra this long, I'm in this parish. That's one way you start to put together names and faces. And then finally, make sure you engage new members. And I think that the two easiest ways to do that is to get them to either join a weekly or a monthly rosary program for vocations. And I think the most effective one is to get them to spiritually adopt a seminarian, because that's where you'll really build some long-term relationships that are special and can only happen through Serra. Communications, again, it's within the club and outside. Directories, and particularly directories, if you put a directory out annually and you put the annual program meeting in it, so everybody has one book that has all the names, all the things we're going to do for the year, that's really invaluable. Monthly newsletters. One thing I've seen a lot of strong clubs do is they include the minutes from their board meetings in their newsletters so that everybody knows what's going on. And that includes knowing what's in the bank account. So, it isn't just two people that know how you're doing. It's everybody in the club that wants to know. And then you've got the typical email reminders, and you've got social media, which I'm not very good at. And it's really important to make sure you got accurate member email address list. That's the way most communications take place. And then to the broader Catholic community, you have bulletin announcements, you have Catholic newspapers and radios. They're usually hungry for content. And if you go approach them with something specific, a lot of times they'll give you half an hour or 15 minutes without any questions. And then a lot of clubs now have websites and some have Facebook pages. So that's communications checklist. Treasurer checklist. Treasurers do all the kind of standard stuff: transactions, reporting, writing the checks, planning, budgeting, guidance. But there's two functions they do that the president's got to make sure that are carried out. One is records retention, and treasurers are generally asked to keep membership and expense and tax information for 5 years. That's what we ask them to do. And this other one, this last one seems so small, but I got to tell you, having a second signature on all bank accounts. We had a club down in the St. Louis area where the treasurer got Alzheimer's all of a sudden. and he could not remember anything. And he was the only guy that could sign on the bank account. That club couldn't get a dollar out of the bank for like 5 months. It was just a disaster. And so you want to make sure that there is a second signature. It doesn't have to be the president, but the president has to make sure that somebody else can get into those accounts if you need it. And then the treasurer handles the annual tax filing. That's really important for nonprofit status. Usually the treasurer is the one that maintains the portal because he has the membership information and the applications. And then the final one here is just an audit. And I think we're supposed to do sort of a formal audit once a year of our clubs for finances, but it isn't practical. You're not going to get that in a volunteer organization. So what I encourage clubs to do is for the treasurer to come to every board meeting with an exact copy of the most current bank statement, unaltered in any way, and just pass it around. If a guy says there's $7,000 in the bank account, and you look on there and it says 6,899, that's close enough. Who cares about that difference? Could be a check here or there. But we had one club, unfortunately, this was many years ago. Guy kept saying there was $6,000 in the account, and he got in health problems. Somebody else dug into it, and there was $600 in the account, and he had used some of the money. I think we were really lucky in that case because he eventually repaid it all. But that's why it's important for particularly the president and the board members to know that there really is the money in the bank account that somebody says. And if the treasurer says there's $5,000 and there's $50, it's time to raise a question on the board about where is the money. But it's usually not that way. I think it's a good cautionary thing. Yeah. We talked about getting the bishops involved. I would recommend keeping this group small, and I'd start with a letter, a 2-page letter that has one page tells what we did the last year, and one page tells what we plan to do the next year. And then to ask the bishop for a face-to-face meeting for about 20 minutes to a half an hour. I don't think it has to take any longer than that, but get some input from the bishop. Make him part of our team and make us part of his team too. You may not get the appointment with the bishop, but at least the bishop will know what you're doing and what you plan to do. Usually they have no idea, other than the events they're involved in. I'm convinced that most bishops have no idea of the level of prayer activity that goes on in Serra clubs. And there's no reason you can't. Say we got, our club has a weekly rosary, and there's no day that has less than 7 people praying a rosary for Vocations. And that's every single day. And some days we have 12 people praying a rosary for Vocations. That's a lot of rosaries. There's a lot of hours in adoration. So involve the bishop. And then try to engage the members. I think it really pays off. If you ask somebody, will you be the Vocations vice president? Well, a lot of people are going to say no because they don't even know what it involves. They think there's 100 things there. But if you ask them if they'll, for one particular event, sign up to do the setup or something like that, people are a lot more willing to agree to do something. So, and the other thing is, I think you need to ask individually. Don't try it in a group because that just gives everybody an excuse to be quiet, hoping somebody else will talk. And then finally, there's a program called Count on Me, and it's a hard copy is mailed to every member of the club with a self-addressed stamped return envelope, and it just lists all these little items, these little tasks, like would you be willing to edit the newsletter? Would you be willing to take pictures? Would you be willing to do sympathy cards for Serrans or spouses that die? And there might be 50 things on there, and they can just go through and check what they want to do. And then somebody gets all those back, and they take a spreadsheet with all the names down one side and all the functions across the top, and they just start checking. And then they give it to the appropriate vice president, and that person knows that's something that somebody is willing to do. Okay, that's pretty much it for that. Club strategic planning. There's not much here. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. If you ever want to see one of the most brilliant strategic plans I've ever seen, the Duluth, Minnesota club has did a phenomenal job in 2013. I still think every club could learn from looking at that, from all the stuff that came out of it. But it is important, I think, to have a strategic plan of some sort. And I also think it's important to make sure that you're satisfying the 2 key prongs of the Serra mission, not just one. It's easy to do these appreciation events. That's the affirm and support existing vocations. It's not as gratifying to do the fostering new vocations, because that's a lot of prayer. It's usually a lot of hard work, and you can't always see the fruits of your labor. Whereas you come out of a meeting with priests, the priests are all excited, you're all excited. Those are the fun things to do in Serra. But make sure you're tackling both of the goals there, and don't have too many goals if you set them for the year. It can't be that every committee has 5 goals, because I'll guarantee you, if 4 committees have 5 goals, nothing's going to happen. Okay, now I think this is pretty close to the end here, the event planning calendar, but the event calendar is pretty much what you say. And this is sort of like your master schedule of everything that's going to happen during the year. And you want to put everything that your Serra Club's going to do, and you want to put all the events in the Catholic Church on there too that are relevant in any way. So in ours, I always put St. Junipero Serra's feast day, St. John Vianney's feast day, St. Bosco feast day. He's the patron of seminarians. You put all the awareness event times, priesthood Sunday, all those things, plug those dates in. And then, sometimes you got to take a look at major holy days, like when does Ash Wednesday fall? When does Easter fall? When does Christmas Christmas Day fall? And make sure you're not colliding with those and you're planning around them to some extent. And then, so that's the event calendar. But the planning calendar is almost the same thing, except take all those events and back them up 3 months from when they're going to take place and put them. And I usually like to see the board look at this planning calendar, which is to say 3 months from now, we're going to do this on Priesthood Sunday. Who's doing what? We got all the bases covered. You have to go back even more if you're going to make sure you get venues locked in for appreciation events like seminary lunches or bishops' dinners, things like that. But the two kind of go hand in hand, but the planning calendar is what's usually missing. Nobody thinks. When I was the president of the club, I got kind of thrown into it. And I still remember I'd finish one project and somebody would say, well, what about this for next month? I said, what? Nobody told me that, And so nobody's worked on it. It's just like it was a mad scramble for 1 year. We finally got it so that we had a pretty good planning focus that was always 3 months out. Okay, I think we have come to the end. I'm going to go ahead and again, just this is a slide that shows what's coming up next week. It'll be vocations and programs. And I think I'm going to help on Saturday. And then the membership and communications happens the following week. And I'm doing Monday that week. I'm doing the very first session. So let's do a closing prayer. And then I'll take questions if you guys want to stay on. I'm running 10 minutes over here. But this is the prayer for perseverance of vocations. And again, if you guys would just follow along silently. O God, you have constituted your only begotten Son, supreme and eternal priest, for the glory of your majesty and the salvation of mankind. Grant that those whom he has chosen ministers and dispensers of his mysteries may be found faithful in fulfilling the ministry they have received. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Okay, I'll stay on here for any questions anybody has or comments. And at some point here, I'll shut off the recording so it doesn't go too long.
If I can, maybe I can start out a little bit. First of all, thank you for doing this. I'm fairly new to Serra. I've only been with Serra about a year and a half, and we just had our elections for officers, and for better or worse, I'm the incoming president. So where you were when you took over is where I am right now. I'm now.
God help you, Jim.
I'm doing the same thing that you did. I'm going, what is that? What do you mean this is coming up? What do you, so I'm kind of in that same boat. So I'm looking for knowledge and for information right now. So right. This is very, very helpful, because we're going to sit down hopefully in June and have a strategic session, because we really haven't had much new blood or revitalization of the club in many years. So we've recruited new people over the last year and a half to 2 years, and we're starting to get them more involved in doing things and really providing some structure and guidance that we just haven't had for a while.
Right.
So this is all wonderful. Is it possible to get a copy of the slides?
Yes. I think that I don't know this for sure, but typically the slides are posted in a PowerPoint format so that people can use them. You can take them and change them. And then
Okay.
there'll be a recording that will be
Yeah.
eventually a YouTube recording that people can watch.
Right.
The nice thing about YouTube is you don't have to have a Wi-Fi connection. You can download a YouTube video to your computer and just show it with a projector. So.
Okay. And one of the reasons I'd like that is to really share some of it with the club, because I don't think a lot of the people know that. And the second is I've already been asked to speak at our local Knights of Columbus meeting.
About what you do, right?
You know, to talk about what does Serra do, and I want to give them some of that broad overall information, not any of the financial or any of that kind of stuff, but who we are, what we're all about, what our mission is, some of that kind of stuff. And then the second thing I'm going to do there is I'm going to show them how the two organizations are really tied together pretty tightly. You know, there are a lot of people in our club who are also Knights. You know,
yeah.
and
that's
talk
that's,
about that.
that's universally true, I think.
Yeah, and how we can create synergies to help each other, you know, and help each other grow or help each other do things or whatever. So these slides will be a major help to me instead of starting with a blank piece of paper, right?
You bet.
You know, so.
Ann will probably listen to this recording, so she'll get your message there. But I'm pretty sure at this point, John is posting these slides out there because the first group had the same question. They wanted copies of the slides that they could edit. Okay.
All right.
Great.
Awesome. And again, thank you for putting it together. This has been, as you felt when you took over, this is, I got the fire hose coming at me, right?
That's right. Oh boy. Any other questions or comments?
I have one. I've been hiding from you guys all this time. I didn't mean to be. I'm sorry. I apologize for that. I just found my little directory thing up in the corner, so I apologize for that. But I do have a question. And James, I'm in the same boat as you. I have been a member of Serra for about 1.5 years, and I just got elected president also. And I'm drinking from a fire hydrant. I feel like I'm drinking from a fire hydrant, and it's wonderful. The people around me have said that they really would like to help me, and I have some questions that I'm not real sure this is the appropriate time to ask or not. So if this isn't, please just say, go find out somewhere else. What does the trustee do? And can a president be a trustee and a president at the same time? Because I've also been asked to do that.
Well, a trustee is just sort of a flexible position on the board, somebody that isn't an officer and hasn't been. We have one we have a trustee who is a woman who's trying to start a house of formation. And we pay her dues, but she provides us with a retreat at her house once a year. And so she is a Serran because we pay her dues. She's not a religious. She's not consecrated religious, so she can be a member. But she would be a trustee. But I don't know why you'd want to be a president and a trustee, because the only roles are to be a board member, and you're already a board member if you're president.
Okay, I see. The
officers are automatically on the board. The officers are automatically on the board.
Okay, so that's really not a valid question then, is it?
Well, it means that you don't have to be. There'd be no reason to be that way. I suppose you could be a trustee and a president. I just don't know what would be the advantage of it.
Okay.
I think you still just get one vote.
I also have another question about what you would suggest, in that most of our members are getting up there in years. We need to have some kind of a fundraiser to be able to do some of the activities that we would like to be able to do. In other words, have altar server awards programs, and I guess what I'm trying to find out is they're too old for a golf tournament. Okay, for example, what other kind of fundraisers do you suggest? I mean, I'm not too sure we could do the cinnamon rolls things that you talked about, the ones up in, I guess, Duluth, maybe it was. That sounds awesome, but I'm not a good cook, so right away I'm off the list on that one. But
That's a really good. Hey, tell me your name.
Jan Landers,
Okay, and Jan, what club are you with?
Boulder, in Colorado.
Okay.
You spoke to our
Sure did.
group not too long ago, and I recognize you from that.
Right. I'll do some thinking about the fundraiser thing. It's a good question, and I've never heard anybody ask it. You know, that would almost be a great. You know, we have these monthly calls with the 4 vocations committees at the national level, where club presidents and club vice presidents get together, and that would be a great subject to just have one that's just sharing fundraising ideas. You know, I would tell you that in my own club, we do not have a fundraiser per se, but everything that we're the low dues user pays food costs. So everything we do, we send out, an invitation. People tear off the bottom and they send it back saying, I'm going to be here. I want chicken, blah, blah, blah. And then they send a check with it. But every one of those things now, we put a line on the bottom that says, I cannot attend, or I'd like to give an extra amount. And we almost totally fund everything we do in our club with the incredible generosity of the members. And particularly like if it's a priest appreciation cookout, we have that. We put on there, I can't attend, or I'd like to pay for 1 or 2 priests by just putting some extra money on. If people know what they're giving to, you'd be surprised what people will donate to. It's when you hit them up with this sort of well, we need some money. We don't know exactly what we're going to do with it, but we need some money. Like your altar servers thing, I would recommend that you go and make a presentation to your Knights of Columbus. Let me tell you something about the Knights. The Knights have a lot of money. And most Knights, I don't know how the Knights are organized, whether it's not a club, but it's what do they call it?
Charter or something.
Yeah, but most of them actually have something in their bylaws that sets aside a certain amount of their revenues to be spent on vocations. And for example, the clubs in the Minneapolis area, I think they've got over 100 of these traveling crucifix programs going in the schools, the Catholic schools up there. And they went to the Knights of Columbus and they said, we're always looking for some good way to, to use that money. And so they pay for the statue kits, and the Serra Club organizes and gets them all out and does the programs for the educates people how to use it. So it's just a little bit different act. Everybody has their own. I think there was one club that was a little creative, and somebody donated a Harley Davidson motorcycle, and then they did a raffle. I don't think it was new though, but apparently that doesn't matter on Harley Davidson.
I saw a really interesting fundraiser online, and I think it was I can't remember the location of it, but it had to do with Last Caller Standing, I think was the name of their event.
Was that a cooking event by priests?
Huh?
Was it cooking? A cooking
event?
That
was a different one. That's another one that we saw. But this particular one had like a lot of priests involved, and they kind of roasted each other. And it was kind of like who voted who off the island if they didn't have the it was like a trivia thing, and it was.
Yeah, Jan, I'd be careful with that one.
It was a blast. I was sitting here laughing at these guys, and they all seemed to be just so into it. And I thought, would that be kind of a neat thing? I mean, scale it down compared to what they did, but wouldn't it be, I don't know, just a real help?
Yeah. Well, I think there's lots of ideas there. I'll try to pass along to, well, there's a treasurer's training coming up. Treasurers are the ones that handle a lot of that stuff. I'll pass it along to some people. Maybe we can put together a call where people can just call in and share ideas. So, hey, going
Yeah.
back to you and Jim, I want to add one other thing. This new member orientation, which is it's sort of like this. It's a presentation I did and I just recorded it dry. There was nobody in the audience, and then it's put into YouTube. But a lot of clubs have used that, not just for new members. They actually use it as a program at a meeting, and almost everybody is shocked to know how much stuff they do not know about Serra.
Yeah, that's true.
So this might be an idea for you, as if you want to bring everybody up to speed at the same time. It's a good way to do it there. Okay, did you have any other good questions? These are good. I must have buffaloed you all.
I think we're looking at so much stuff coming all at one time that I'm honestly I'm still kind of spinning. Sometimes I need just some downtime to sort through what I just learned and what I just heard, so that I can kind of wrap my head around the multitude of things that can be done, and then try to turn around and apply it to the specific group of people in our club. And I'm still learning them. I still don't even know all their names. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna do a round robin thing one of these days and make all of them get up, move one person, sit down, and then visit with each other, because I need to learn who they are, and I need to learn what they want to help with, and how there's too many of them for me to meet with each one of them
Right.
in that short amount of time. But I'm overwhelmed with what needs to be done, and not knowing well enough who I have around me to help me do those things. And they're wonderful, wonderful people, but I don't know them yet. So I don't know all of them yet, and I'm still working on that.
I was in our Serra Club for 3 years before we had a woman president, who I thought was a waste of time. But every meeting she started by making everybody stand up, state their name, the parish they were from, and how long they'd been in Serra.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
That was really the first time. Not just the new people. Some people do that just for the new people, but that was the first time that I started to put names with faces, because it takes a long time. And the other thing I was going to say, I think in Serra clubs, a lot of them fail because they try to do too much.
Yeah.
And what I would recommend is, if in your heart you're passionate about this altar server award thing, pick that, get a group of people, and just do it well. If you do one thing well, it's worth doing about a dozen things, half-assed. So yeah. And that's what happens is, and you're going to run into this, from the old people that are going to say, well, we've always done this, and we've always done this, we've always done this, and pretty soon all your time is done, because you don't have enough time to even do half of what the things that they've always done. And that's where you have to be a little bit assertive in terms of setting priorities there. But I really like the idea of picking a few things and doing them well.
Yeah. Amen.
It keeps the fire hose down a little bit.
I was going to say, I was going to just say, I felt the same way with my Serra Club when I became president. And one of the things I did was, like, about every other meeting, I talked to them ahead of time, but I had someone just share for 5 minutes how they became a Serran and why they became a Serran. And it was a really marvelous, deep conversation that we had. But that helped a little bit. I mean, you can't spend your whole time doing that, but just asking people to volunteer to share that. And I just put myself out there. I said, I don't know your stories, and I want to, get to know you, and I want to have other people value the richness of what's in this room. So that helped us a lot.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. I might make them do that if they fuss about doing musical chairs. I'll make them get up and talk to me.
You bet. Absolutely. because there's just rich stories. It's very humbling.
Yeah, yeah.
Listen, keep attending these training sessions. You get a chance to ask more questions, and there'll be more that'll pop up. But I
Oh,
do want
right.
to one cautionary note. You know, when I did all the training the prior 4 years, Ann's taken over this year, but I got accused by Greg Schweitz, who's the president of Serra International, of waterboarding people with information. You know, just pouring on. And I always like to tell people that the goal of training is to tell you everything you could possibly do, but not that you should do everything you hear. You know,
Okay. Yeah.
you got to pick and choose, but the job of training is to let you know what the options are. And I think some people come away almost discouraged because they think I can't possibly do all that stuff. Our club can't do that.
Right.
And that's where you got to set priorities, pick and choose, focus, and do it well. So, listen, I'm going to end the recording here so it doesn't get too long. Otherwise, nobody will listen to me.